1937 saw the London, Midland and Scottish Railway introduce their most powerful class of steam engine, the Princess Coronations. Of these, only 3 have been preserved, and only 1 is still running. Duchess of Sutherland, number 6233. Over the past 25 years, this engine has been a reminder of the glory days of railways, running on Britain's main lines, even being the first steam engine given the prestige of pulling the royal train in over half a century. But that isn't to say that the engine's interest is limited to the 21st century. The Duchess has a storied history, from its construction in 1938, its unusual save from scrap, and the preservationists who kept the engine in quality condition. This video is a companion to my history on the Duchess of Hamilton. If you haven't, I would recommend watching that video first, as it covers the history and details of the Princess Coronation class in more depth. Now that you're back, or completely ignored my advice, here is the story of the Duchess of Sutherland. In 1938 saw crew works working on 2 batches of Princess Coronations. The first 5 of these were streamlined, but the second 5 were not, as the LMS wanted to make comparisons between the different designs. As minimal differences were found, it was decided to produce more of the recognisable streamlined engines for further batches. The 4th engine of the unstreamlined batch was number 6233, named Duchess of Sutherland, which cost £13,800 to build. 6233 was painted in the LMS's standard Crimson Lake livery and allocated to Camden Shed, serving London's Euston Station. Although it didn't pull the streamlined trains the class were named for, like the Coronation Scot, the engine was still used on prestigious trains, such as the Irish Mail and the Midday Scot. After 6234, Duchess of Abercorn, the last of the non-streamlined batch, proved a success of installing a double chimney onto the class to improve power output. The rest of the class were retrofitted with the modification. 6233 received its double chimney in March of 1941, but it was found that the greater release of steam could block the driver's view. This was rectified with the addition of smoke deflectors in 1945, which created an updraft when at speed to ensure the steam raised above the engine. Due to the outbreak of World War II, many engines had been repainted into a plain wartime black, but Duchess of Sutherland retained its original livery until 1946, when it was painted into the LMS's post-war lined black livery. When the government nationalised the railway network and the British Railways in 1948, their new numbering system saw Duchess of Sutherland become number 46233. It was repainted into Express Blue in 1950, then repainted again in 1952 into Brunswick Green, which it would wear for the remainder of its working life. By 1955, British Railways had begun its modernisation plan, introducing diesel traction and starting the electrification of the West Coast Main Line. Duchess of Sutherland was reallocated to Carlisle in 1958, briefly returned to Camden in 1960 before settling into Edge Hill Depot in Liverpool. From here, the Duchess continued pulling prestigious trains such as the Merseyside Express and the Red Rose, although once electrification south of Crewe was completed, engines had to be swapped as the Coronations were considered too large to travel beneath the overhead wires safely. Although the London Midland region were reluctant to abandon its large steam engines, the time came when they couldn't keep them any longer. Duchess of Sutherland was put into storage on the 14th of October 1963 and was officially withdrawn for scrap in February of 1964. 46233 had run 1,650,000 miles in its 26 years of service, the second highest mileage of the class. To put that in perspective, this would equate to it running 170 miles every day between its completion in 1938 and its withdrawal. Duchess of Sutherland was left for 8 months awaiting the cutter's torch, but if you've seen my Duchess of Hamilton video, you'll know that the engine was rescued by an unlikely benefactor, the holiday camps of Billy Butlin. By this time, Butlins had bought 3 LMS Pacifics for its holiday camps, 46203 Princess Margaret Rose, 46100 Royal Scot, and of course, 46229 Duchess of Hamilton. As business relations were good, Butlins had no trouble acquiring Duchess of Sutherland. 46233, alongside Duchess of Hamilton, returned to Crewe one more time for restoration, where it was repainted into its classic LMS Crimson Lake livery, and each engine had its smoke deflectors removed. It was then moved to the head of Eyre Camp, where it proved to be popular among children and holidaymakers. But other eyes were on these locomotives, specifically those of Alan Bloom. Bloom was an internationally renowned horticulturalist, working in the cultivation of plants. He owned Bressingham Hall, along with the 200 acres that came with it, used as gardens and plant nurseries. But he also had a passion for steam engines, and in 1961 had started buying traction engines and rollers. 1962 saw the collection expand to railways, not just standard gauge but narrow and miniature, building railway lines around his land for the locomotives he bought. By 1968 he had expressed interest in the engines owned by Butlins, but was initially turned down. However, as the condition of the locomotives was starting to deteriorate, and Butlins not having the facilities to upkeep them, they agreed to Bloom's next approach in 1970. As long as he paid for transport and restoration and kept them in good condition, he could have 4 engines on permanent loan. Initially, Bloom had wanted all 4 LMS Pacifics, but as Duchess of Hamilton and Princess Margaret Rose were scheduled for appearances during the 1971 season, he settled for Duchess of Sutherland and Royal Scot, along with tank engines 32662 Martello and 30102 Granville, which can both still be seen at the museum today. Duchess of Sutherland was the first engine to be moved, being transported by trailer to Eyre Townhead Yard, where it was re-railed, and from there by rail to the Bressingham Museum. Restoration started soon after, as Bloom had always placed emphasis on working steam. The engine was found to be in surprisingly good condition, but there was still plenty of work to be done. The restoration cost £16,500, with an estimated 20,000 man-hours. On the 28th of May 1974, after more than a decade of silence, the Duchess's fire was lit, and 2 days later it was giving cab rides to visitors. The Countess of Sutherland attended the event, being the one to officially launch the engine. The Bressingham line, at only a quarter of a mile long, was short for such a large engine, but it marked a huge achievement for Bloom and his team to have the Duchess run on it. But it was not to last long. In 1976, 6233 developed a leak in its firebox tube plate, estimated to cost $12,000 to fix, a price not even Bloom could justify paying. The UK was not to be without a working coronation for long, however, as the opening inspired the National Railway Museum to begin overhauling Duchess of Hamilton for mainline rail tours. Duchess of Sutherland, meanwhile, remained a popular static display exhibit and was bought outright by Bressingham in 1989. But it was not until 1993, after 17 years, that thoughts once again turned to having the engine put back in steam. A study of the engine was done, with the resulting estimate being a cost of £162,000 to get 6233 running, a major increase from its prior restoration. Although reluctant, Bressingham decided it was more important for the Duchess to return to steam than remain in their hands, so they started looking for someone who would overhaul the engine. By 1996, it was agreed to sell the engine to the Princess Royal Class Locomotive Trust. As the company did not at the time have the money to buy the engine, one of the trust leaders, Brel Yurt, had his company, White House Construction, purchase the engine until the funds could be acquired. For him, this had the added benefit of helping promote his company entering the civil railway engineering business. The engine was removed from Bressingham on the 3rd of February, although not everyone was there to see it off. It was too much for Alan Bloom, who loved all his locomotives, and decided to stay inside while the Duchess was taken away. The engine was moved to the Midland Railway Centre at Butterley, where it was stored inside the West Shed along with the Trust namesake Princess Margaret Rose, who they had bought directly from Butlins. The plan was for a portion of the income from the Princess Royal's rail tours to go towards 6233's purchase and restoration. But disaster struck in 1997 as the engine developed leaking tubes and had to be withdrawn from service. White House Construction wanted to sell the Duchess by the 30th of June 1998, and there were reports of buyers from other countries approaching the company. The PRCLT was in dire need of money and applied for a bid from the Heritage Lottery Fund. With only 4 weeks to go, the fund contacted and arranged a meeting with the trust, inspecting the locomotive. Not long after, they put £324,500 towards the Duchess, more than enough to buy the engine and begin its overhaul. Work began in August. Most was done at the Midland Railway, but more advanced parts like the boiler were sent to the Severn Valley Railway. The engine's cab, dome and funnel all had to be lowered to fit Railtrack's maximum height limit, and modern safety systems like an automatic warning system had to be installed. The vacuum brakes were also replaced with air brakes, as most coaches had been converted to that system due to it being safer. Originally, the overhaul was expected to be completed by March of 2000, but it took until January of 2001 to first return to steam. On the 17th, the Duchess ran on the Midland Railway, the first time it had moved under its own power in 37 years. July saw the engine cleared to pull charter trains, with all seats filled on its first, held on the 18th. By this time, Duchess of Hamilton had been out of steam for 3 years and off the main line for 5, so this run was set to be a grand return for the class. Unfortunately, Duchess of Sutherland's new braking system applied itself and couldn't be turned off, so the debut train had to be rescued by a diesel. After the issue was solved at the Midland Railway, the Duchess was able to return to the main line, and this time it was there to stay. After a number of successful charters, a proposition came up for the Duchess which the PRCLT was quick to accept. 6233 was to make its most prestigious journey yet, pulling the royal train of the reigning monarch, Queen Elizabeth II. This was not only special for the Duchess, but would mark the first time a steam engine was at the front of the royal train since British Railways modernisation plan half a century earlier. It was important that this journey, taking the Queen from Anglesea's Holyhead to Crewe for her Golden Jubilee, was done right. Initially, only a small group of the Trust was informed for security reasons. A pair of rail tours, travelling from Chester to Holyhead in October of 2001, were able to be used as rehearsal for the event, with extra staff and security being explained as part of Railtrack oversight. Further visitors to the Duchess were said to be inspecting the engine for future rail tours, with the implication that the engine was in for a luxury service deal. Those who did know were eager to ensure the Duchess was well presented for the Queen, using references from the London Midland region of British Railways. A replica headboard was created using a design made to celebrate the Queen's original coronation. A set of headlamps were also made, which would have been attached to the region's royal train. 5 of these replicas were commissioned over 3 batches, so people didn't figure out their purpose. 4 were made to be worn by the Duchess, and the last was to be presented to the Queen. Eventually, the rest of the Princess Royal Trust had to be informed, and not long after, the train was publicly announced. All eyes were on Duchess of Sutherland, which was about to pull what could be the most high-profile train of the preservation era. The engine's last public operation before the event was on the 11th of May, after which it was thoroughly inspected. Its support coach, repainted to match the engine, was placed in quarantine and searched for any possible threat. The 8th of June was used as an opportunity for publicity photos of the engine to be taken, and the 10th saw the engine depart for Holyhead. The Duchess was kept at Valley overnight, just south of Holyhead, as the track had a T-loop the engine could use to turn around. 6233 packed down to Holyhead at 3:20 on the morning of the 11th, where final checks were done and the engine was filled with coal and water. Not long after, the royal train arrived, hauled by diesel 47787 Windsor Castle. As the royals were still sleeping, extra care had to be taken when coupling to the coaches. The train was due to depart at 9:15, but was delayed by 6 minutes due to the Holyhead to London Express running late, losing the recovery time scheduled for the first journey. This proved to be no issue for the Duchess, which ran splendidly to Llanfairpwll, arriving ahead of schedule in a time of 17 minutes. Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip were taken by road to Beaumaris Castle, while the Duchess continued to bang her for publicity shots. Windsor Castle then pulled the train back to Holyhead, where the Duchess's fuel was replenished and the fire cleaned out. The The steam locomotive then pulled the train onto Llandudno Junction, ready for the Queen's return. Both the Queen and the Duke praised their first run, and the commemorative headlamp was presented to the Queen. The final run to Crewe was delayed once again, but it proved beneficial. Original plans saw the train pausing in a passing loop, but it was able to go by without stopping. Chester was passed a minute early, and by the time the train reached Crewe, another half minute had been gained. At Crewe, the Duchess was detached from the royal coaches, and was able to reverse past them on the adjacent track at walking pace, with the Queen and Duke coming to their windows to thank the footplate crew. The royal train was taken on by diesel, and Duchess of Sutherland went to the Crewe Heritage Centre for servicing before returning to the Midland Railway. Although a few hiccups had been encountered with management, the Duchess and its crew had ensured that everything ran smoothly, showing that steam was still able to do important and tightly scheduled work with ease. The Duchess's services were called on again for an important figure in 2004. The National Railway Museum at Shildon, now known as Locomotion, was to have Prime Minister Tony Blair in attendance for its opening ceremony. The original plan was to have 4472 Flying Scotsman pull his train, but the engine had failed. Although not owned by the National Railway Museum, Duchess of Sutherland was elected to take its stead, having proved itself with the Queen. The Duchess's popularity continued into 2005, when it was chosen to pull another royal train, this time for the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, who was visiting the Settle Carlisle Railway. On the 22nd of March, the royal train brought the Prince to Clapham, where he left to attend to his duties. The train met the steam engine at Hellifield, which took it on to Settle. Here, the Prince boarded the train, which ran along the line, over the Ribblehead Viaduct and on to Kirby Stephen. The newly refurbished station buildings were reopened by the Prince, who then prepared for the next leg of the journey. But instead of travelling in his coach, he had been persuaded to ride in the footplate. The Prince was enthusiastic about being able to see the engine at work up close, although declined the offer to help stoke the fire. A visit was made to Appleby, where the Prince explored the station before returning to his coach for the final leg of the journey to Carlisle. Here, the Prince thanked the crew and volunteers for the journey, and was gifted an engraved shovel to mark his run. Later in the year, Duchess of Sutherland was put on display at Crewe's Open Weekend, alongside 3 of the other 4 surviving LMS Pacific locomotives. This was done to give one last look at Duchess of Hamilton before it entered a lengthy restoration to add a streamlined casing. Duchess of Sutherland continued running regular rail tours until 2010. The Duchess's boiler certificate was coming to a close, so the engine needed an overhaul to continue operation. In March, it was decided that, for the remainder of the season, the engine would wear an LMS black livery to make the year extra special. 6233 was taken out of service by the end of the year. The overhaul was able to be completed quickly due to the PRCLT's thorough care of the engine, with the locomotive back in steam by March of 2012. The engine was again given a different livery, this time outfitted in BR Brunswick Green, complete with number 46233. It continued to pull rail tours across the country until 2017, which proved to be an unlucky year for the engine. On the 1st of October, the engine derailed while on the Midland Railway. The Duchess had to be taken out of service for safety inspections, but as the accident had caused no damage, it was able to return to the main line by the end of the month. However, the engine was not to last long. During November, one of the engine's tubes was found to be cracked, causing steam leakage, so 46233 was taken out of service again. This alone meant the engine had to be given repairs that would last until the following year, but upon further examination, 21 of the engine's 40 tubes were found to be cracked in some way. The decision was made to bring the engine's decennial overhaul forward by 4 years, allowing them to not only replace the tubes but other important elements. By July of 2018, Duchess of Sutherland passed its tests and was issued a new boiler certificate. The Duchess returned to its familiar LMS Crimson Lake livery to celebrate its 80th anniversary and was back in regular service by September. While Duchess of Sutherland may not seem as distinct or grand as the streamlined Duchess of Hamilton, the engine is arguably more impressive for one reason: it is still going. The efforts of many preservationists have allowed the engine to not just be a static memento of the past, but a living piece of history we can still experience for today. 6233 allows us to witness the power of the LMS's most powerful class, the engines which ran the West Coast Main Line and even held a steam speed record. The Locomotive has been given the prestige of not only pulling multiple Royal trains, but being the first steam engine entrusted to do so in a gap of 50 years. And whether it is pulling royalty or regular passengers, Duchess of Sutherland has proven to be a strong, smooth and reliable engine. One that has been consistently pulling charter trains for over 2 decades now, and with any luck will be pulling them for many, many more.